Hi, I'm Dean Shelley Smith-Acuna of the Graduate School of Professional Psychology. I am really, really thrilled to have you here. So thanks so much for being here, taking time out of your night to be with us. I can pretty much guarantee that you're going to be really glad that you're here. This is one of my favorite evenings of the night. You are sure to be absolutely inspired by the fantastic work that our students do in all these different sites. We have a slightly different format than we've had in the past, so I see many familiar faces here, lots of you coming back for more than 1 year, which is great to have you. We're going to have a number of different panels to really highlight the work that's being done and really help you grasp the important efforts being made by the International Disaster Psychology Program at DU, at Graduate School of Professional Psychology. And in particular, even if this really great work wasn't being done, wouldn't it be terrific to come and see all these maps and know that students were so idealistic and big-hearted and really had the intention to make a difference in the world? Well, I love those great intentions, but those great intentions aren't enough. They need to be translated into actually having the expertise, the supervision, the structure to really make a difference with the work that they do. So one of the things I want to challenge you to listen for is not just the positive feelings that you're going to get and the admiration for the students' courage and good intentions, which you're going to hear a lot about, but also think about the desire to make the world a better place and the way that that actually happens through the work that these students are doing. I know that I leave with lots of inspiration just from hearing about what's really different based on the work that these students do year after year. So I'm not going to take up more of your time, but I am really, really delighted to introduce the director of the International Disaster Psychology Program, Dr. Judy Fox, who has a lot of really interesting things to say to you. So thanks again for being here tonight, and look forward to hearing your reactions to our evening.
Well, hello, welcome everybody. And it's great to see so many familiar faces, alumni, guests that come every year, friends, and then also new faces who are in our audience, and of course all of our students. So thank you all for coming tonight. And thank you for joining us on this international adventure. I hope you all have your passports stamped. Do people know what I'm talking about? Hopefully. And have visited multiple countries tonight. You've seen the displays of the wonderful work that our students have been doing in 9 different countries this past summer. And if you didn't have a chance to see one, check it out afterwards, after our presentation. This event is always such a fun way to share a part of our program that's been a really powerful educational experience. And we also get to share our students with you, which we're very proud to be able to do. I wanted to thank Stephanie Walton and also Bridget Cromry for all your work organizing this evening. And Bridget, you've herded us well to get things done. So there you are. Thank you very much. And also my thanks to the Harbor Lights Foundation, who generously support our summer program. This year, we'd like to begin a tradition of honoring and thanking a community supervisor who's been working with our students in field placements here in Denver by awarding an Excellence in Community Training Award. The work that our community supervisors do, they just go above and beyond, and we so value your professional contributions to our students. The Denver placements add so much to the depth of training that they receive, and we'd like to thank all of you. Gwen Mitchell, our field placement director, will present our first and now annual award. So Gwen.
Good evening. In honor of all the stories that have been curated for us tonight, I'm going to kind of start and end with a story. and then honor this tremendous supervisor that we work very closely with. But this program started just over 10 years ago, and I think when it was first formed, there was a lot of like, huh? Like International Disaster Psychology? Like, what is that? And where, talk about its relevance and things like that. And now, 11 years later, when we say it, people say, that feels very important in the world right now, and there's a lot going on, and which feels very true, and even more closer to home. It's not only internationally, that Colorado very specifically has been hit kind of hard over the years, starting with events like Columbine and floods and fires, and more recently the Aurora Theater shooting, and that a lot of things have happened on our soil here as well. And in our efforts to be prepared to provide services both domestically and abroad, we built a collaboration with a psychologist who has been at the front lines since the beginning of all of these things. Each and every disaster that's occurred in Colorado, he's been absolutely at the forefront in terms of being a state that's now considered a model of best practice. Dr. Kirk Drennan is the program manager for disaster behavioral health within the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response of the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Since graduating from GSPP, yay, in 2001 with his PsyD, he completed a fellowship in public psychology and program evaluation from CU Health Sciences, and a fellowship in advanced leadership from DU's Regional Institute for Health and Environmental Leadership. Since 2003, Kurt has led the state disaster behavioral health planning and response program supporting community mental health centers and local public health agencies and improving their disaster behavioral health capabilities. Between 2003 and 2010, he and his team were based at the Colorado Department of Human Services, the Office of Behavioral Health. With the move to the OEPR, greater partnership between public health and public behavioral health has been built. His work has included multiple statewide disaster responses, the development of the COCERN, the Colorado Crisis Education and Response Network, a multi-system partnership for behavioral health response, resource development, and lots of training delivery. Upon the inception of the International Disaster Psychology Program in 2005, Kurt has supervised over 20 interns, hired 4 IDP students, guest lectured multiple times, and is now teaching our disaster mental health course. I end in honoring Kurt, and I'll call him up with, when I was hired back a few years ago, Dr. Fox had a very funny story about after a very recent disaster, getting on a line, and everyone was waiting for everyone on the phone to get on at the same time, and as people came on and announced their names, the large majority of people joining the line were IDP grads, along with Kurt and Judy, and it was a proud moment for the director of the program to realize how involved our grads are in terms of disaster response. So, Dr. Drennan, it is our pleasure to award you our Excellence in Community Training Award, or first annual.
You want me to talk? I don't like being the center of attention, but thank you. Where do I start? First of all, this kind of stuff only happens in a relationship, and I have been blessed to be surrounded by amazing relationships, to have Shelley as a mentor, to have Tom as a mentor, to have Judy as a mentor, to have somebody in the community like Tom Olbrich, who's been a huge mentor and support, then to be so immersed in the IDP and build so many wonderful relationships with students over the years. It's been fantastic. And then to be able to teach this year has just been fantastic. So thank you for this honor. I am beyond touched. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay. He's taller than me. Let's see. There we go. See, they can't believe I knew how to switch the slide. Everybody was coming up to help me. Okay. All right. So just to fill in, some of you may be new to the summer program. Our students do an 8-week international internship with one of our international agency partners. They're involved in many different kinds of mental health projects and services, as you'll notice on the posters. Our hope is always that they're able to have an experience of putting into practice what we teach in the classroom, and that they come back after the international internship and reflect and build upon their knowledge of themselves and of others, develop their mental health skills in the second year of the program, and really have the summer and the second year be a place where they move forward their professional goals and identities. This year, our students interned in 10 sites across 9 different countries, including Nepal, the Philippines, Cambodia, Bosnia, Sri Lanka, 2 sites in Liberia, Malawi, South Africa, and Chile. A really awesome summer and great experiences. This is a really passionate group of graduate students who took hold of this opportunity and put their all into it. They've just done remarkable work and reflection, and we're just very proud of them. This is the kind of process, developing this sort of thing, that really takes a village, and I wanted to have us thank those who've been involved in making this happen, including our core faculty, who, if you could stand, that'd be awesome. Gwen Mitchell, Rohini Gupta, Bree Court, and we're going to put in this category Tom Barrett, who was, who to the students who went abroad is clearly a core faculty person. He's now an adjunct faculty, having retired, although not really. And then also we have a number of adjuncts and other faculty at GSPP who teach in our program, and I wondered if they could stand up and be acknowledged. Or do we have, I know I've seen some there. We have Aaron, Kurt. I also saw Laura, who was here, so several of you are here. So to get started, I'd like to introduce Bridget Cromry, who went to Cambodia this past summer, and she's going to be introducing our panel presentation. So Bridget, there you are.
Thank you, Judy. Oh, I'm a little short. Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all so much for coming to share in this special evening with us. We hope you enjoyed your time meeting with each country group and getting the chance to hear about each group's special internship experience. It's an honor for us to share with our family, friends, colleagues, and professors about our time abroad, as well as an opportunity for us to honor the places we lived and the people we connected with. This summer, our cohort had diverse experiences in 9 countries across the world with 11 different organizations. In order for us to capture the unique personal, professional, educational, and spiritual experiences from the summer, we have created 4 panels to highlight these themes in order to give a more personal snapshot of these incredible 2 months. Our first panel will share thoughts and stories of pre-departure, connection while abroad, and the re-entry process. The second panel will dive into cross-cultural experiences and stories. The third panel will address this summer's impact on their professional identity. And the fourth panel will speak to their growth in global awareness as well as personal growth. There will be an opportunity for questions from the audience during the last few minutes of each panel, so feel free to think of things and offer those up. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our first panel, who will be discussing pre-departure, connection, and re-entry. So we're going to start by introducing ourselves.
Hello, I'm Kristen McGeehan. I spent my summer in Colombo, Sri Lanka, working for the Family Rehabilitation Center.
And I'm Bridget again. And I lived in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and I worked for a transcultural psychosocial organization.
Hi, I'm Julia Evans, and I was in Sarajevo in Bosnia working at Wings of Hope.
My name is Megan Hogan, and I was also in Sri Lanka at Family Rehabilitation Center.
Hi, my name is Julia Harbell, and I was in Kathmandu, Nepal, working with Voice of Children.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Provin. I was in Monrovia, Liberia with the Liberian Association of Psychosocial Services. So, like Bridget said, this panel is going to focus on pre-departure, connection, and reentry. And just to give us a little bit of structure and make sure that we're kind of all on the same page, I'm just going to give some quick definitions for each of those pieces. So pre-departure is the process that we all went through preparing ourselves for professional and personal lives in our host countries. Connection is how we tried to make meaningful bonds with individuals and the culture as well. Reentry is about the various physical and emotional phases that we all went through upon returning. So Bridget is going to start us off with some words about pre-departure.
Begin, keep beginning, nibble on everything. Teach yourself to whistle, lie. The older you get, the more stories they'll want to hear. Make them up. Talk to stones, short out electrical fences. Swim with sea turtles into the moon. Learn how to die. Drink wild geranium tea. Run naked in the rain. Everything that happens will happen, and none of us will be safe from it. Pull up anchors, sit close to the god of night. Lie still in a stream and breathe the water. Climb to the top of the highest tree until you come to the branch where the blue heron sleeps. Eat poems for breakfast. Wear them on your forehead. Lick the mountain's bare shoulder. Measure the color of the days around your mother's death. Put your hands over your face and listen to what they tell you. That's Ellen Knott. As a parting gift, before leaving for Cambodia, several of my friends wrote me their favorite quotes about travel. This one continued to touch my soul and paints a picture of what it is inside me that continues to want to seek knowledge and connections with the world. I think this seeker's trait is common in many of the students who choose to pass through this program and who have the courage and the will to face the unknown, wake up in it every morning, breathe it, be astounded by it, and continue to stay in it even when it beats you, tugs at your heart, makes you sick, makes you cry, and separates you from the people you love and your most basic comforts. Before leaving for our summer journeys, each one of us prepared differently. Some of us could not wait to get on the plane, while others of us went kicking and screaming. Quote, I'm tired of imagining what this experience will be like. I'm tired of putting expectations on this experience. I'm ready to find out. End quote. That's from Kristen right over here. For some of us, the summer strengthened the relationships at home, and for others, it tested them. Looking back now on a time that seems so long ago, none of us could have fully imagined what experiences or people were awaiting us. As I sit here now, I can visualize the pockets in my heart that hold the special people who I connected with and who welcomed me into their hearts, lives, and cultures. Sometimes I can hear the whispers of their names, and when I close my eyes, I can see their soft, loving faces. Despite the many difficulties and the things I wanted to leave behind, I carry these people with me tonight, tomorrow, and for the rest of my life. I am forever changed because of them. There is no preparing for that. There is also no preparing for confronting your most hidden demons, for feeling hopeless, helpless, and utterly out of control. No preparation for the fear, for the love, for the smallest acts of kindness. No preparation for what it is like to feel as if you've reached the bottom of your barrel of courage and then having to ask yourself, can I dig down a little deeper? Can I put myself in the shoes of another? Can I face my own privilege and still choose to help instead of flee? These are all questions that never would have crossed my mind when preparing to leave for Cambodia. But they are the questions that I asked myself every day when I was there. Now that we are back, we hold onto the memories hard and beautiful, and often think of the people we came to know. This, to me, is the most beautiful part of living abroad. To highlight this type of experience, I'd like to turn the talk over to Julia, who will share a personal story about connection during her time in Nepal.
Connection to Nepal came in surprising ways, and so I wish to share with you a short excerpt of something that I wrote this summer. The bus was crowded when I hopped on. I made it onto the steps, but no further. I have come to expect being pressed up against fellow passengers and abandon any Western expectations of personal space as soon as I step on. We rumbled along to the beat of Nepali pop songs and car horns. The bus lurched to a stop, and the passengers swayed forward in unison, like a wave crashing onto the shore. A man hopped up. Together, we shared the step. 2 more stops like this, my corner on the step growing smaller and smaller. The bus conductor, a human Tetris master, called out instructions for passengers to move. His outstretched hand weaved between bodies and gently nudged people into previously unseen space. The bus once again lurched to a stop, where 4 women waited, eyeing the bus, seemingly undeterred by the fact that it was bursting at its rusted seams. I looked on in disbelief. Shuffle, 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 nudge, 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 hands sliding along the rusted metal bars, people folding further over the lucky or trapped passengers with seats. The women were on, the conductor, a young man in his 20s, literally hugging one of them, his hands grabbing onto the metal door frame, his body forming the door. Believe it or not, I loved my morning commutes. The absurdity of 50 people on a vehicle designed for 15 or 20, I just loved it. I cherished this time because it gave me the sense of truly living in this vibrant and chaotic city rather than simply visiting it. Nepal is a collectivist society, and perhaps nowhere was this more apparent than on the bus, where I was engulfed with a sense of community and interdependence. One of my favorite moments was watching a man hand a baby out the window because the mother simply could not manage to get off the bus with him in her arms. Or watching a busload of people reshuffle to empty a bench and then gently usher a blind man to the seat. Or standing in the crowded aisle, my backpack on the front of my body. My shoulders were slouching under the weight of the bag as it got caught and bagged down by arms, shoulders, and other seemingly floating body parts. And a woman sitting on the bench beside me, reaching up without words and taking my heavy bag and placing it in her lap. Or getting off the bus, handing my fare to the conductor and realizing I had lost a 10 rupee note. And then, voila, a hand fluttered out the window, waving my crumpled bill, which had fallen in my attempt to get off. The buses are a microcosm of Nepal and its collective awareness of our interdependence, manifested in patience, tolerance, kindness, and thoughtfulness, as if each individual is simultaneously able to see through their own eyes and the eyes of their neighbor. Bus rides were interactive, lively, and shared. They were refreshing, freeing, inspiring, and soul-soothing. I dissolved into collective thinking and relish in a strengthened hope and optimism for the power of people and human connection. I miss these moments as I hop onto the light rail and see a sparsely populated train filled with headphones hooked up to smartphones. We are prepared to arrive in our countries, and then we prepared to leave. Unlike flying to Nepal, I dreaded getting on that plane. I left, my backpack stained with dust, my hand with henna, and my cheeks with tears. I feared leaving behind the version of myself that blossomed in Nepal, that patient, kinder, more open version of myself. On the plane, I wondered, how could I keep Nepal alive and back while I was back in Denver? How could I keep it with me? I feared falling back into my default mode. I contemplated the idea of life-changing and realized Nepal would be life-changing if I chose to make it so. I could hold close the lessons, growth, knowledge, and experience from my summer and keep it in my everyday life at home and at school. But I had to choose. For me, life-changing is not some passive thing that happens to me. Rather, it's an active commitment to remember, to be mindful, and to act with intention. In discussing our reentry with my fellow classmates on this stage, intentionality was central to our storytelling. We return and we are viewed as experts. I am the expert on Nepal in the eyes of many of my friends and family. I have seen it, I must know. We become ambassadors, which further complicates how we tell our summer stories. It is a privilege, but it's also a burden. My narrative is only one narrative of Nepal, just as Megan can only share her experience of Sri Lanka, which will differ from that of Kristen's. Or Lindsay's version of Liberia, Julia's story of Bosnia, Bridget's understanding of Cambodia. In my case, if I mention the word sexual abuse, will my audience shut down, avoid eye contact, or worse, exclaim about how poor these boys are, victims of hardship, needy, small, and broken? Reentry is in many ways the hardest piece to prepare for. How is it that we feel uncomfortable, vulnerable, alone even, when we return to our perceived comfort zones? Reentry is a process. Some days I forget to appreciate that I have a shower with warm water instead of a bucket of lukewarm rainwater. Other days I murmur a quiet thank you as I step out into cool, crisp, and relatively clean air. And then some days I wish nothing more than to get on a plane destined for Kathmandu. So tonight I thank you for joining us and for letting me try to bring a little bit of Kathmandu to you.
Thank you, Julia. A little more about reentry. If your nerve defy you, go above your nerve. That's Emily Dickinson. We all did something daring over this summer. We all defied our nerves. Even the most well-seasoned travelers were challenged. We all survived, and more than that, we lived. But sometimes the most difficult and intriguing part of the whole experience is coming back home. Just when you thought the hardest parts were behind you, you get home, sit in front of those that you love, wrap yourself in their embraces, and feel a myriad of sensations: loneliness, loss, sadness, gratitude, happiness. Upon returning, like Julia mentioned, I battled what narrative I wanted to tell, what I wanted to say versus what people wanted to hear. Shockingly, what happened was that I felt quiet and without a voice to describe what I had lost and what I had gained. Re-entry becomes an intentional integration of old and new. Choosing to be a citizen of this world means you may always be balancing between what you know, what you don't know, and creatively melding the two together to make a life. This choice means not only going above your nerves, but sometimes disowning the nerves altogether. Thank you all so much. We'd like to open this panel up to a few questions. Yeah, you can ask a question. Okay.
So you know the work that I do is all about privilege and oppression, so of course that's where my question is going to come from. So now that you're back, how do you balance differing experiences of the privileges that you have and your interactions with other people?
Yeah, okay. So I think, and I can only speak to my experience, so I'm going to speak from there. Sri Lanka made it very evident how privileged I was. My white skin gained me access to so many different things. My American status, even though they assumed I was Australian, and Kristen and I were Australian like 90% of the time. But that status got us so much power. I remember there was one time, and I have never experienced somebody judging me by my skin tone and assuming something about me by my skin tone. And it was towards the end of our trip, and we were going and visiting the different centers that we had been working with and providing supervision and trainings for. And during that process, we were supposed to be meeting some of the clients that had agreed to come in and talk to us. And so Kristen and I were sitting around a table, engaged in conversation with some of the other workers, the women that were spending time there and working and all of that. And a man came in, and he took a look at us, and he had a complete and utter meltdown. He had been put into a camp where he had been tortured. And upon seeing us, he had thought that we were there to take him back to the camp. And that power, that because of our skin color, because we were different, and because we stood out, that was the assumption that somebody was making about us, was something that I carry with me today. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. And I think acknowledging what is inherently mine and which I may not have any control over, but which the world witnesses and that people come in contact with is something I attempt to keep in mind when I interact with others, especially those that may have less power than me.
Thank you all so much.
So we're the cross-cultural panel, and so I think we'll start off by introducing ourselves and telling you where we were this summer. So good evening, my name is Ashley Kowal, and I was working with Voice of Children this summer in Kathmandu, Nepal.
Hi, my name is Reed Height, and I was working with the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation in primarily Makati, Philippines.
Hi, my name is Rihanna Holmes. I was working in Phnom Penh, Cambodia this summer at the Transcultural Psychosocial Organization.
My name is Miley, and I spent the summer in South Africa working with the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation.
My name is Emily Wagner, and I was in Kathmandu, Nepal, also at Voice of Children. Thanks. We all chose to sit on this panel because we have a common thread in the stories which weave our experiences together. We prepared to leave our lives on hold, then quickly found ourselves immersed in new worlds. These places impacted us in ways we could not have imagined, and yet when we returned to our new old worlds, to the quiet streets, to the noise in our heads from resounding words spoken by people whose faces we can't seem to stop imagining, we were left with our stories. Some of them funny, some hopeful, and some so heartbreaking we don't dare to release them from our hearts. Each of us have chosen to share stories because we believe they hold truth. We believe in their messages, and we believe in the people and places we wish to honor by breathing life into the words we use to describe them. These are our experiences working and living in the space created when two cultures meet. I would like to start by asking you, what changes happen when you stop trying to plan your day, your month? What about when you stop trying to plan your life? Is anyone feeling a mild amount of panic thinking about not having a life planned? Well, it's because here in the West, we really like planning, and we seem to hold the world accountable to those plans. We have a word, spontaneity, to describe breaking the mold of a life planned. In Nepal, time works a little differently. You live forever, and you also live in all things. I was once walking down the street when I suddenly injured my foot. Men and women came rushing out of the shops to gather around to offer medical advice and to hold my hand. And the women in this picture right here, they stroked my face while repeating, "No problem, no problem." When Ashley had to leave to buy bandages from a pharmacy down the road, they reassured her by saying, "She is my daughter now." When Ashley returned, they sat in front of us and they made us necklaces with a pendant that symbolized friendship. Lesson number 1, your pain is my pain. We are all the same. One day I was wandering the dusty alleys laden with vendors selling brass, and when I stumbled upon the shop of a man selling supplies for the backpacking region of Everest. On that Sunday, I had hours of work to prepare for the week to come, but I decided to accept his invitation anyways to stay for lunch and tea at his shop. He was a Buddhist monk who left a silent life at the monastery to take care of his dying father. Using a dictionary to translate Nepali to English, he gave me messages of hope, and he told me what is important in life. He gave me that book that we were using to translate and told me to return it to him when we meet again in our next life. Lesson number 2, when someone offers you tea, take it. There was another time we stood in the streets and water was rising from the monsoon rains. The entire city paused, and we were late for work. We were sopping wet and our spirits were low, and then an old man with a basket suddenly approached us. He dipped his hand into a pot of red and placed dots on each of our foreheads and sprinkled marigolds in our hair. He smiled widely and then just walked off, and the man beside us explained that he walks around each day gathering a list of names for people to pray for and think about throughout the day, and that meant that he was going to think about us that entire day, and that meant that we were incredibly lucky. We were filled with a gratitude that would last our entire journey, which, by the way, gratitude is a better antidote for life than caffeine. Lesson number 3, when your world feels bleak, try looking at the world outside of yourself. It is much less lonely than you originally thought. So what do all of these stories have in common? These are the moments in which we experienced a rewriting of the way we interact with those around us. These are the moments in which our experience turned from individual to collective. So why is it so important for us to adapt to our environments in this kind of a way when we're working cross-culturally? Well, we ended up discovering through others the lessons which became an integral part in our understanding of the boys and the staff we worked with. This is because relationships are healing. In Nepal, they are everything. And this kind of work just can't be done without them. To understand this was to begin to see the culture we worked in. To feel these things was to connect with those around us without the use of language. It was to integrate more fully into an agency that cared more about relationships than it cared about numbers or reports. And it was to learn that the inclusion of another culture's parameters of professionalism and relationships was not to leave our own identities behind, but to expand them, to allow them to grow so that they could reach out and hold on to even more reasons to believe in a better humanity. To work cross-culturally is to be given a gift. This is a gift we must take great care of and responsibility for. Because what awaits us is the precious opportunity to see what incredible work can be done when two cultures meet for one goal.
So when thinking about cross-cultural experiences, I was struck by parallels of history, of the oppression and the colonization that run through the histories of both South Africa and the US. The picture above is a painting with the year 1994 on it. This represents the year that the apartheid ended. The apartheid in South Africa institutionalized racism and made it essentially illegal for many residents to remain in their homes and maintain any sense of normalcy in their lives. Nelson Mandela and others in the ANC, the African National Congress, fought fiercely to regain the right to freedom and finally succeeded in 1994. Nelson Mandela spoke often on freedom, but not just freedom. He also encouraged the people of South Africa and the world to think about responsibility. He says, "For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." This for me is truly reminiscent of an American hero, Martin Luther King. Everywhere I turned, I found clear connections between these countries. The end of the apartheid reminded me of the civil rights movement and many other immigrant movements in the US. The current uprising in South African communities around inequality is comparable in nature to the Black Lives Matter movement. Both countries are facing very real challenges, in my opinion, with severe human rights violations. Both strive to find balance among an extremely diverse population. I'd like to share a story, but I want to give a little background before I do. The Afrikaners were a part of the Dutch immigrant population that were and are considered to be some of the most oppressive towards the Black South Africans. Despite this, the Afrikaans culture is rich and beautiful. When attending a poetry night, this complex scenario was addressed. During this poetry night, the host of the evening, an Afrikaans speaker, made a joke about the dying culture of the Afrikaans people. This struck me because it so clearly illustrated the residual tension that remains, especially for younger generations. There is a struggle between feeling guilty around their people's past, but still being proud and wanting to preserve their unique language and culture. This simply shows the deeply intertwined histories and the complexities of the South African identity. In honor of the end of the apartheid, I'd like to share a quote from a powerful South African activist, Robert Sobukwe. The philosophy of Africanism holds out the hope of a genuine democracy beyond the stormy sea of struggle. South Africa reminded me of the choices we can make every day, a choice to live and a choice to find meaning in this world, of the inspiring resiliency of humans. South Africa, for me, will always represent hope.
When I think about the culture in the Philippines, it's really tempting for these beautiful images from my jeepney rides to work one day to come to mind. But at the same time, American culture comes to mind, and how much of it is a part of the Philippines and how that's unavoidable. And I struggled with that really hard for a while. And then there was this one day where I was like, you know what, I need tea. And I went into this cafe, and I had gone to so many shops that I thought would have tea, and they all had bubble tea, and that is not what I was looking for. And finally, I got to this one that had a wall lined with books, and that was something else I hadn't come across in the Philippines. And so I got my tea, and I started going through the books in typical Reed fashion, and running over to my other interns, excited, of course, about the books that were available to me, and a lot of them were American, or at least books that are common to read in America. And I was a little hesitant about it and a little nervous that there was only one Filipino book on the shelf, and it was the Noli, which is the Filipino book to read. They're very proud of it, and I will get to it someday. It's supposed to be amazing. And then this woman came over to me and started talking to me about the book in my hand and saying that she hadn't gotten the chance to read it yet, but she was so determined. And it turns out she was the owner of the cafe. And that turned into a lengthy conversation about the books that we both love. And it was the first time that I wasn't so frustrated about seeing American culture in the Philippines, and I wasn't so anxious to find their traditional culture, but realized this is a country that has influences from other countries that are undeniable, and that's okay. And it turned into a beautiful friendship with a woman who I now share books with. And so when I think about the culture of the Philippines and what I take from it, it's that moment that it's okay if it's not what you expected, and it's okay if it brings up things that you don't necessarily love about your own.
This kapok tree is from Tapram, which is in Siem Reap, Cambodia, and it is doing its usual job of supporting the monument and destroying it at the same time. The roots pull apart the temple's building stones, which then become supported mostly by the root system itself. When the tree eventually dies, both it and the building will come crashing down. These require constant watching and maintenance in order to preserve the building from further collapse. This tree is seen as a metaphor for the state of Cambodia regarding human suffering and culture. One can study human suffering to an extent, but can never truly understand it until you're living among it. During my time in Phnom Penh, I came to realize that the culture of Cambodia is littered with sadness and fear of their own country turning against them. This fear is not unfounded, for there are many reasons for them to fear their current establishment, ranging from arrests made based on something someone posted on Facebook to tanks sitting in the city center. Despite all the darkness, Cambodia is a place of resilience. The Khmer people, many who lived through the Khmer Rouge, are a resilient people. The fear and paranoia is still very much so present in their daily lives. But these people stand up for and fight for one another. They cheer for one another. And they mourn each other's losses. In the last weeks while we were wrapping up our projects, a political analyst was assassinated, causing mass turmoil in the country. This man represented the potential bright future of Cambodia, and his death signified the death of this dream. Although these people have seen, heard, and experienced insurmountable pain, what I valued most about the culture was their ability to find humor in every situation. During the first week, I recall thinking, these people laugh more than they work. Even in therapeutic groups aimed to build psychosocial skills among victim survivors of the Khmer Rouge, the group leaders and participants alike bonded the most over humor, reminding me of my own family back in the United States. And with that, I leave you with a paraphrased Mother Teresa quote: "Words which do not give light only increase the darkness." Thank you.
So thank you for listening to our stories, and if we have time for questions, I'm going to hand it off to you guys.
That's a tough one. I have a response to it, and I don't know if it's exactly answering your question, but that is such a word in the Philippines. Resilience is something that you hear constantly in any conversation, and so I actually came back really mad about that word and like dreading hearing it because I didn't know what people meant anymore. And I had seen it be something that could shut people down. And so I've been struggling with that a lot lately. And I'm starting to move past my frustrations. And within myself, at least, and the work that I hope to do, I'm starting to see resilience as this desire to move forward despite hardships I've had and refusing not to, if that makes sense, and basically saying, yes, this is hard and re-entry is hard and there are lots of things that could stop me and us, but I'm gonna keep going and I'm gonna keep finding ways to take care of myself while I do it. So next panel.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for being here. My name is Brian Iliescu. I was at the Carter Center in Liberia.
My name is Michelle Fagan, and I was at PDRF in the Philippines.
My name's Tim Nesbitt. I was also in the Philippines with Michelle and Reed, and I just hurt my knee on the chair. And it really hurts.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, I'm Laura Fees. I was in Sarajevo in Bosnia working with the Post-Conflict Research Center.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Pitts. I was in Concepcion, Chile. We were in 3 different locations: Fundación Paréntesis, Casa de Acogida, and third place was Center for Victims of Disasters.
I would like to begin by framing the next 15 minutes. The IDP program is more than acquiring an appropriate level of knowledge or skills. This program and our faculty challenge us to discover our professional identities. Professional identity is fundamentally a process of discovery. Developing an understanding of who we are, dances with what we do. In many ways, this process of discovery elicits change, and these are our stories of change.
Leading into this summer, I thought my professional identity was my job, what I did. I've grown up in a culture where the second question on a first date is, what do you do? Tell me about your work. It's infrequent that I'm asked, tell me about who you are. What drives you? What inspires you? Prior to this summer in Bosnia, I didn't really know, honestly. I knew what I didn't want to do, or what I thought I didn't want to do. I've inadvertently started this new pattern of eating my words. I used to say I hated psychology, and well, here we are. I said I didn't want to do clinical work, and now I leave sessions inspired, enlivened, challenged, and enriched. I am humbled by the experience of complete strangers entrusting me with their raw realities of suffering. This experience is all quite new to me and has shifted my perspective on work, on vocation, and on purpose. This shift started this July in Bosnia when I met Ruzmir on the Marsh Mira, the annual peace march that commemorates the Srebrenica genocide. The trek retraces over 60 miles of mountainous terrain where 10,000 Muslim men, boys, and some women attempted to escape from Srebrenica in 1995. Only 2,000 people survived. Ruzmir is a Bosniak man in his late 20s who finished 2 master's degrees in criminal justice and law, yet still could not find a job in Bosnia. Wrought with corruption, nepotism, and high unemployment rates, the last 2 decades since the end of the war have engendered a generation of highly educated, curious, and philosophical young people losing hope for any opportunity in Bosnia. I asked Ruzmir what plans he had, and he disclosed that he had just received an offer from a McDonald's in Germany, offering a position taking orders and serving burgers. I questioned whether he would take it, and he just shrugged, saying, "Yeah, I have nothing else." Ruzmir's story was told over and over again, but by different people. I heard such similar stories: highly educated, brilliant young people unable to find a job in their homeland, desperate to find work, any work, regardless of their overqualification. A couple of weeks later, I met a man named Ramiz, or more appropriately referred to as the Bone Man. Ramiz is a survivor of the 1995 genocide and endured the death march. He now spends his days carefully hiking through the hillside of Kamenice, searching for human remains. This seemingly idyllic hill, lush with green forestation, was the site of the most deadly massacre during the death march. When he first returned home, Rami searched for his father and his brother, who were subsequently found in a mass grave. He continues looking, though, deactivating landmines when necessary, searching for remains so that families can find solace in the identification of their missing loved ones. Pulling his most recent find out of a plastic grocery bag, he pointed out the mandible and a femur, the bones with the highest chance of DNA identification by the International Commission on Missing Persons. He rarely goes a day without discovering some remains, and says he'll continue until every victim is identified and every family is freed from ruminating over the whereabouts of their lost loved ones. The Bone Man does not earn a cent for his efforts. Ruzmir knows his suffering are the ramifications of an unjust system. He is well aware of his overqualification at McDonald's. But will Ramiz just be known as the Bone Man? Will Ruzmir just be identified as the man who fills orders at McDonald's? Am I just known as a student clinician? We are so much more than a title, than a job description, than a degree. I wish I had time to tell you more stories about other Bosnians, about Amir, Fatima, Safet, and Hassan, about their stories of survival, resilience, and justice. Yet these experiences are only supplemental to the core of these people, the core that drives them to so fully commit their lives to the work they've deemed meaningful. And let's be reminded that work does not necessarily equate to one's profession. Think of Ruzmir at McDonald's. He did not dream of using a criminal law degree to take him behind a counter. What a privileged position it is to find meaning and fulfillment in our occupation. But if we don't, which it's likely we may have been in or are still in such a position, how do we reframe a professional identity to be intrinsically integrated with our core selves? I can no longer separate my professional identity into spheres of occupation as an artist, student, therapist, or intern. I must instead continue to ask myself the questions: what drives me? What inspires me? Am I integrating these answers into my daily life, regardless of what job I'm doing? In the words of psychologist M. Scott Peck, life is difficult. I expect to experience suffering, to intimately understand sorrow. I would never encourage the avoidance of suffering, for therein lies the crux of life, of growth, of engagement, and of change. But what do we do with this ubiquity of pain? Personally, I love to create. For me, painting is a beautiful medium to process what words fail to express. I hope to give this language to other people, not necessarily through art specifically, but through a medium which enables them to understand themselves, to grapple with the realities of this hurting world, and even in the midst of suffering, to flourish. This is more than just a professional identity. This is what shakes the dust. Thank you.
So here we are. Yeah, my slide's all funky looking. Huh. Well, for your reading pleasure, I've provided this slide. This will give you more of a context. If you weren't paying attention when we were doing our little rounds, this is your redemption, I guess. Let's get this started. Before leaving for the Philippines last spring, I had been getting individual clinical experience. My identity within the therapy room was really starting to take form. I had been lucky with clients consisting of previously homeless and refugees that were willing to and did make positive life changes. I more or less stayed in the passenger seat and helped them along the way. Although I enjoyed this individual work, I came to understand that the reason why many of the people I worked with and had experienced grief and suffering is because of their environment. The systems in place at one time or another had either caused one problem turning into a snowball effect or chronically made life difficult for them. Psychotherapy and case management was the response to their disaster. As one part of our stay in Tacloban, Philippines, Reed, Michelle, and I worked with the Breach Project. We first were introduced to around 30 of the beneficiaries through a 3-day training. We found that many of these people who were laughing and completing activities together had never spoken with each other before. Our coworker, Kim, who had been working with these people for nearly a year, stated that he had never seen them come together like this before. He explained, they are acting like a community. On paper, Breach seems like a great opportunity, yet PDRF was having some trouble getting the people who had signed up for the housing to actually move and stay there. After brainstorming, my co-interns and I decided we could help. Using strengths-based interviewing techniques, we sought to understand the barriers that this population was experiencing, which hindered them from moving to the safer area. At first, during the interviews, we would hear that the transitional area was too far away from their livelihood. As most of these people were fisher folk who knew the water that they lived near, understandably, they were more concerned with surviving day to day than preparing for the future disasters. However, once we dug deeper within our interviews, we found that this move contained many more dynamics than just livelihood. The barriers had to do with feeling safe in a new environment, feeling like they were part of a community, and having their children remain in a consistent environment. We also found that their main ability to cope and their greatest strength came from the overwhelming social support of their original communities. They helped each other rebuild their lives after Typhoon Yolanda. Based on what we saw at the training, our interviews, and what the PDRF staff told us in our own interviews with them, we recommended to PDRF headquarters in Manila that we believe the key to overcoming many of the barriers that these people were facing was to focus on community building, using the resources of social support that already existed. We suggested things like social activities, further trainings, and community meetings. We wanted to see a system which openly allowed beneficiaries to create their own community. Since we have left the Philippines, PDRF staff has organized focus groups to further extend the conversations we started around barriers to moving. Within the transitional barangay, PDRF staff guided community meetings and appointed community officers. I spoke to Kim last week, and he proudly reported that the community meetings and community cleanup activities occur regularly without PDRF guidance. Since we left the transitional barangay, the population went from 8 families to 40. Also, the families will be moving to their permanent houses next week. I got my feet wet in mental health systems work, and I love it. It has expanded my professional identity to include a new respect for myself in finding where I fit within the realm of mental health. I still enjoy individual work, but I personally feel that I can also serve as good, if not a better purpose, in system level and policy level change. It is safe to say that my comfort level outside the therapy room has risen tremendously. I see that humanity may require something different from me than strictly individual contributions. I will leave you with a quote from a bit of a Filipino hero in the disaster preparedness business, Dr. Ted Esquerra, a first responder and advocate for mental health preparedness. He wrote to us, "Together, we save lives and ease the pain of humanity." That's it.
My experience was similar to Tim's. I've always known that I've wanted to work internationally. However, I was unsure about in what capacity I could do so. Judy, Gwen, and Tom must have seen something in me that I was blind to. They encouraged me to apply for the internship at the Carter Center, and for that, I am very grateful. The work I did while at the Carter Center helped me uncover the type of work I am passionate about doing abroad. My story of change begins with a lunch I had with John Mahoney from the World Health Organization and Tom Barrett. As Friedrich Nietzsche asserts, envy is a good thing, as it opens our eyes to the true nature of who we want to become. And Tom, I must admit, I was a bit envious of you, John, and the work that you have both done in your lives. That moment was truly impactful. And over the next 6 weeks, I continued to piece the puzzle together of how who I am fits with the work that I was doing. And none of the pieces were missing. For that, I thank you and the rest of our faculty. At this point, we'd like to open it up to questions.
I know with me, I felt really connected to the organization that I was at and the people that I was with. And I've stayed connected with them, and I talk to them a lot. And yeah, a little bit is because I want to know how it's doing and if I had an effect and all that good stuff. But more importantly, I want to know how they're doing, and I want to know how their lives are. And Tim spoke briefly about Kim, who was one of the people that we worked with in Tacloban. And I found my emotions so interweaved with his emotions at some points because he cared so much about those people, and it made it so easy for me to care about those people. So yeah, I would say staying connected with them, and I watch the news, I share things on Facebook, and I try to bring my experience over here as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, this came up a lot actually in the Philippines because we, in the organization that we were with, PDRF, we were actually we were the first mental health people that they actually had ever been introduced to, really, that they had worked with. So we kind of showed up there, and they're just kind of like, we want you to do your thing. And we're like, what's our thing? And then, so, yeah, a lot of ethics around that, trying to make sure that they understand the things that, we can help them with, we can, provide, information on, and not acting like, because they were pretty much giving us like a blank slate to do whatever we wanted to do. I mean, really. But I mean, of course we didn't take advantage of that. Thank you, Tanya, for the help. But yeah, so that played a huge role. We had just trying to figure out what we were actually going to do, and from there, we used a lot of the ethics that we learned to actually guide us to where we would go from there. So yeah, I think it played a huge part in our experience.
So in Chile, I guess likewise, I'll say that in terms of thinking ethically with our interaction with individuals, it was definitely each interaction was a process. And each interaction was intentional in terms of you would start from square one and think, well, which direction do I need to go? You wouldn't just, at least for me anyways, didn't treat each interaction as just like trite, as if it was the same, as if it was, routine. I think in Chile specifically, kind of like what Tim was saying, we had an issue with translation because a lot of folks called us psychologists. They would come talk to us as we were psychologists. And while our supervisors knew that we were students and that we were doing a practicum, people that we were working with, other staff members would come up, and even clients would come up to us and say, hey, psychologist, or a professor, or these sort of things. And part of that was in deference to us being foreign, and part of that was in deference to our education. And the education system in Chile is different because they don't have undergraduate and postgraduate. They have one track. If you're in med school, you do one track. You start from year 1 to year 7. If you're a lawyer, you start from year 1 to year 5. You don't do undergraduate degree and then graduate. So the fact that we had an undergraduate degree was equated to we have our degree. And that we're practicing clinicians and professionals, and that we have all those ethical things in order. Come do your thing because you know what you're doing. You have a treatment plan already set up and that sort of thing. And so part of it was intentional with, well, let's at first, we really didn't know that there was a difference in the education system. That hadn't even come to our mindset. So when folks would refer to us as psychologists, and even just thinking of LPC versus psychologists in the state of Colorado versus other states, there's a difference in terms of education and in terms of licensure. But we had to recognize that there was a difference in Chile. That was the first thing, was recognize that we're being given this professional deference that we don't have. And then the next thing was kind of understanding what their education system was in the first place, and then how that differed from our own. And so part of that comes from listening, part of that comes from curiosity, to figure out what exactly is the difference and how are we supposed to be relating to them. So yeah.
Don't ask about ethics. So I'm Katie Marsh, and I was in Liberia this summer with Lindsay, and I worked at the Liberian Association of Psychosocial Services.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Deneke. I was in Mzuzu, Malawi, working with St. John of God Hospitaller Services.
And my name is Jen Peng, and I too was in Mzuzu, Malawi at St. John of God.
My name is Brittany Redman. I was in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I was at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation.
My name is Kristen Elsie, and I was in Concepcion, Chile, with the Universidad de Desarrollo.
Living in another country can be both exciting and daunting. You ask yourself questions. Are the people going to like me? You worry, will I be culturally sensitive? And you wonder, how will this trip change me? Today, we're going to share some of our experiences from this summer in Liberia, South Africa, Chile, and Malawi. These stories will share what our experiences taught us about global awareness and growth through gender, religion, social inequality, and justice. So in America, I'm very openly not religious, I'm a feminist, and I'm very career-oriented. For the most part, that's accepted here. Going to Liberia, I was a bit daunted. It's a very religious culture, and it's very children-oriented. This turned out to be a major struggle for me. Upon meeting people, most would ask how many children I had, whether I was married, and if I was Christian or Muslim. I always felt awkward. The stunned faces staring back at me made me feel like I had suddenly sprouted a second head. I tended to shy away from these conversations, but occasionally I would be drawn into one. One day, on one such occasion, Lindsay, the other intern at LAPS, was working at another site, and I went into the office. I was hoping that the office would be pretty deserted and I would get time to spend working on a grant. Instead, I spent the majority of the time surrounded by 6 men, arguing if it was women's duty to have children. Fun, right? Though not necessarily fun, looking back, it did end up being a great learning opportunity for me. I can't even tell you how the whole conversation started, but somehow I mentioned that I didn't want children. I immediately regretted saying this. I suddenly had the attention of all these men looking at me in complete disbelief. They were trying to convince me that it was my duty as a woman to have children. It says that in the Bible. Well, I wasn't even gonna go there. So having these men staring at me like this and telling me this, I immediately was defensive. Here, I would argue left and right if that's my duty or not. And I felt cornered. But I kind of took a mental step back and, realized that I'm not in my culture, I'm in their culture. And this is beyond abnormal. One of the men even said, oh, I've heard of one woman before that has said this too. She wasn't Liberian, but it was another woman. The other men had never heard of that. So I listened to their side and their reasoning, and I realized that having children is how this culture saw that they were leaving their legacy. I explained that I was leaving my legacy as a therapist. Every person that I work with and every person that I can help improve their life, that is a life that I've given to the world. I do not feel that it's my duty to have children. I feel that it's my duty to help people. Though this conversation did start a bit heated and it ended with us all not agreeing, but with the ability to see each other's side. I struggled often in Liberia with my role as a woman and what it was assumed to be there. And I also struggled to respect their culture, but still hold true to who I was. But this struggle did help me to open my eyes and to truly understand that the experience of other cultures, and to remember that just because my culture is different, it doesn't mean that it's right.
So this evening I'd like to share a brief example and story of my own spiritual growth on my time in Malawi. As a bit of context, Malawi is roughly about 17 million people, and about 85% of those people identify as Christian, as do I, but I had never really experienced this sense of faith and service, selfless service to other people in a connection like I had in Malawi. The men in these pictures with me are all part of the St. John of God Brotherhood. The organization we were at is faith-based, is Catholic affiliated, and these men are pledging literally their lives as an act of service to this organization and to the people that organization serves. And I distinctly remember one evening, I think it was at the end of our stay, when Jen and I went to the home of these men to share a meal with them, to reminisce on memories with these men, and to really culminate our experience with a fellowship, with a sharing. And I remember as we were finishing our meal, we're walking back to the kitchen. I'm carrying my dishes with me. And I walk into the kitchen expecting to be able to wash my dishes, to be able to thank these men for the food that they provided, for their fellowship, for their trust in us with their culture, with their stories. And I'm stopped at the door by one of them, Isaac, and he says, no. He says, this is my way to serve you. This is my way to love you, to show Christ to you, to be a servant to you. And he washes my dishes, something I had dirtied, something that I had planned on using as a way to thank them, as even a personal reflection for myself. And these men, time after time after time, I saw them give of themselves. One of them, Raphael, one evening he came and found me and he said, hey, there's a woman outside that they dropped off who needs to get to the overnight clinic. She can't stay here. Will you come help me? And he had plenty of other things he could have done, and yet he took his night, almost his entire evening out, to make sure that this woman was safe, to make sure that she was loved and cared for, because so many people St. John of God serves never had someone that loved them in that way, never had someone that respected them and listened to them previously. And the final memory I have of these men, we were backing out of the driveway, and all these thoughts are running through my head about my experience with them. And as we back out of the driveway, what do I see but this dimly lit window right above the kitchen sink as they are washing my dirty dishes? And I'm forever stuck with that image in my mind, how selfless these individuals are and how selfless Malawi, the warm heart of Africa, really is. And I'm truly blessed to have been a part of that. Thank you.
For our summer internships, we researched and presented on the socio-political histories and mental health context of our respective destinations, which provided us with valuable yet limited insight into our experiences to come. Inherently, perhaps even against our will, we formed assumptions about the places that we'd be going, the people that we might meet, and the work that we would be doing. Of course, we also carried with us in our travels assumptions about ourselves and ideas about how we might represent our own country. With regard to Chile, I was and continue to be rather impressed by the overall progressiveness of their approach to mental health. When I shared my perspective with the locals, on many occasions they responded with surprise. As their country is one of, if not the fastest growing economy in Latin America right now, it seemed that Chileans had a tendency to compare their experience to our own. The large majority commented that they respected our country for its technological, scientific, and medical advancements, and expressed admiration for our venerable universities. At times this summer, some of us were even left with a discouraging impression that it was our American money or information, perhaps more so than the work that we had come to do, that possessed desirable healing powers. According to my research, both professional and personal, the international picture of a growing and increasingly prosperous region does not necessarily coincide with a greater satisfaction of life for the average citizen. It is important that we consider the secondary effects of economic growth, the counterstory. Privilege tends to be an isolating experience for those involved, on either side and all over the world. In South Africa, Brittany observed that in many cases the wealthy are literally building higher walls so as to drown out the noise of those actively fighting for their rights. In Concepcion, Elizabeth and I found ourselves in the midst of a protest of what at once seemed to be a backlash against increasing tuition rates, marginalization of indigenous communities, and one of multiple undesirable foreign investments. In some regions, these divides are more apparent, and the resistance is demonstrated more loudly than in others. Many of the Chileans with whom I spoke seemed grateful for an opportunity to discuss the widening social gap in which they were finding themselves. What was most surprising to me was that the majority of these individuals did not seem to be aware of similar issues going on our own soil. Indeed, science and technology unveil new incredible truths about the world every day, yet our predicament lies with the fact that justice and humanity are not easily measured. What happens when political expediency and financial concerns overshadow these crucial matters? While walking through the enchanting streets of Valparaiso, we couldn't have helped noticing the sign posted on one of the federal buildings. It reads, "Que miran tus ojos, que ya ni nos ven." In English, what do your, sorry, I missed part of it. Discapacita tu incapacidad de ver a los otros. In English, what do your eyes see when you cannot even see us? Disarm your inability to see others. So many of our clients thanked us just for being present, for showing up, for bearing witness to their trauma, an experience that was sometimes painful but overwhelmingly enriching on the whole. Learning about social injustices through the personal narratives of others offered me a much more comprehensible picture of the immensity and the complexity of these issues, not only in Chile, but elsewhere in the world as well. I'd like to suggest that the act of taking the time to truly listen to another is healing in and of itself. The experience of learning about another culture, the strengths and the weaknesses alike, through direct human interaction is unparalleled. It challenges our natural biases, our assumptions, and gives us an opportunity, if we're open to it, to seeing issues through a new lens. It gives us the chance to help others do the same. Just as we show up for our clients in therapy, we have a responsibility to show up for one another in life, to demonstrate respect for differing opinions, to be more vulnerable, and to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions for the sake of understanding and connection. In his book, Pedagogy for the Oppressed, Paulo Freire writes the following: "In dialectical thought, world and action are intimately interdependent, but action is human only when it is not merely an occupation, but also a preoccupation. That is, when it is not dichotomized from reflection." Freire reminds us that attempting to understand these issues requires immense patience and dedication. He differentiates action from human action, making clear that our very human ability to consider, to reflect, to worry, to wonder, is what gives our work meaning. May we find strength in our human frailty, trust in our own intuition, and bind together with others to take action in accordance with our strongest convictions. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
So I went to Mizuzu, Malawi with Andrew at St. John of God, and I worked between 3 different clinics. They all differed, but they were similar in the sense of the client identities, which were older males, and that's something that I was worried before I even interacted with them, is that they'd see me as this young foreign female and think that I wasn't adequate enough because I don't share the experiences they've had. I'm not from the same country, or even the same gender or culture. And it was apparent with all of the clinics I worked at that they received me with open arms. They only know me by the identity that I present myself, and that's gonna be in the clinical role. Whereas I know myself with so many. And so I was nervous to begin with, but it's, I think, the same mentality that they had, is that as long as we're both willing to compromise, adapt and respect to the different ways of life, even the way of approaching like the situation presented, it was gonna be effective. And so I think, like the same way that Brian said earlier, what makes it so beneficial is listening. Regardless of language, it's very obvious for them to see when the empathy is genuine, or when I'm sitting there and looking at them and trying to listen, whether it's English or Tambuka or Chichewa, that we're there to help. And so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of barriers that were naturally presented, but I think as long as they saw that, again, genuine desire to be there and help, it was going to be effective from both parties. So.
I'll just add really quickly to that. I think what Kristen talked about earlier in terms of like bearing witness, that's really kind of the meat of what we did this summer. And I think, you know, I have to say that the theory and the research that we all studied before we left about the people and the places and the situations that we were, you know, going into, it doesn't speak to the contextual realities on the ground. And so I think for me personally, being in South Africa and working with survivors of torture, it was really just bearing witness to their story and being present and listening to them. Yeah, and there's a huge humility in that, in being able to receive that. And I think that there was definitely a time where I felt like I wasn't actually giving them much. But again, as Kristen said, that listening is just like part of the healing process in and of itself.
And I think all of us can probably agree to this. A huge aspect too is that we all learned from them more than they learned from us.
Yeah, I think
we think so. But yeah.
So, for instance, in Malawi, in the context we were working in, mental health isn't seen, I guess you could say, as narrow as many people might see it in the States. Mental health was dancing. If you were an elder, if you were a go-go, you would be out dancing to be able to show other people, you know, I have things to offer this community. I'm not just this dead and dying person. Really, what I learned more than anything else there was this opening of my own interpretation of mental health and seeing just the day-to-day interactions and day-to-day context information that I've been gathering that really can be used in a psychosocial kind of way, and helping someone realize that you have skills, you have ability to have a job. We can work together to support you in that. And in Malawi, having a job is, of course, difficult to achieve, but that mental health component coupled with job training was something that I had never really seen in the States and work that I participated in and viewed before. So it was amazing seeing the ways that Malawi was really able to add more and more to this idea of what mental health really is.
I feel like I feel like their like mental health sort of exercise activities were naturally more embedded daily than American culture, hands down. He worked with Umoza and the Go-Go's, so the children and elderly, and I worked with substance abuse, the mental acute ward, and rehab. So they're all very different populations, but one thing all of them had in common was just how each clinic made sure to approach mental health in a verbal and physical way. And so it sort of just naturally became part of their routine daily. And it was great because it, from what we saw, it almost became self-sustenance. So.
Before we left, we had to, right when we got to our placements, we had to do, our first assignment was an interview of a colleague. And the colleague that I chose to interview, and this is within the first week of being there, so I was like, hey, I'm Brittany. I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions. And so, yeah, skills, exactly. But I don't even know. I think one of the questions that was kind of on our list of ideas of having this conversation was, what can I do to be most helpful in this organization? And the response I got is something that like I'll never forget. Her response was, be a normal person. And so, what? Yeah. So it is hard. She said, be a normal person. And so to me, you know, she really said, when you see me here at work, like I'm at my best. And she's like, the way that you're really going to be able to get to know people is by being who you are. So really like staying true to yourself, being authentic in the room with clients. And I mean, I think here in the United States as well, but also I think so much in Africa, they know when you're not being authentic and they call you out on it, and they don't appreciate when you're not being authentic. It's just not their culture. And so that's probably the main thing I took here that I would like to use with my clients.
So any professor that has had me and all of my cohort can tell you that I like CPT, I like CBT, I like structure in my therapy. So that's great when I'm working with my military veterans with PTSD, but being in Monrovia with LAPS, they don't really do that. They kind of do have the same topics sometimes, but it's all storytelling and sharing their experiences, and I was not used to that at all. But being there for the 2 months, I started to realize like how important that is. And I was recently assigned a new client who is a military veteran, and he is using those storytelling. And I am so much better prepared now, having been with LAPS, to work with him. Otherwise, I would have been, okay, well, let's get back to this worksheet. Let's get back to this, fill out your ABC sheet. So I think that really did help me grow. Like, I still do like my structure, I still like my CPT, but I'm more flexible, I think, with the therapy that I can use.
Thank you. Don't worry, you get to go soon. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here. Thank you for our panelists. It was so wonderful to hear your experiences. Quickly, we wanted to thank our faculty, our professors who supported us immensely over the summer, responded to our emails, especially Judy, who listened to us every single week, and long sometimes emails from us, sometimes calls from the hospital. And we are so grateful for all of you. Without your support, this summer would not have happened. So thank you. So that concludes our evening. You can take a few minutes to visit, and then we're going to start to clean up. So thank you all.